Right. Thanks very much, Jana. Thanks to the team for having me talk tonight. I'm quite excited. I've never done anything quite like this. I have 3 webcams set up at my desk with various different implements. This is a kind of a take on a talk that I often give in person, which I just kind of run as a 1-hour what is hydroponics and how you can do it at home. I prefer to do more hands-on talks. So even though this is going to be mostly PowerPoint based, I do have some practical demonstrations that I'll show you along the way. The way we I thought I'd do it is we're going to have some poll questions come up so that I can interact a little bit with the audience and make sure you're still all there, because to me it's just like talking to my laptop otherwise. And then I'm also going to do some demonstrations, so I'll switch back and forth between a presentation and demonstration. Please feel free to ask any questions at any time. Chances are I might not look at them immediately, but we've got part of the team look at it, and then I'll be able to answer your questions at the end. I believe Jana's already gone through this, so I'm not going to go through it again with regards to questions. If you have anything or accessing the chat, hopefully you're all able to do that. There'll also be some polls, which I'm going to test shortly. They're going to pop up on the center of the screen, and then I'll give the audience a few seconds just to come up with an answer, and then I'll kind of discuss that answer. So the first one's kind of a test, and also to get an idea of the audience and how much you guys know about plants, or whether you've grown nothing at home or experienced. So it's quite simply, have you ever grown any plants? All right, that's quite cool. I can see them all coming in, all your answers. So there we go. That should be published now. I think everyone can see. So it looks like almost everyone here is a yes, a few no's, but I'd like to start, so that's great. That's exactly what I like to do this talk about. It's kind of an introduction. If you haven't grown anything, hopefully it'll help you start, and more so help you start growing hydroponically. Can we close that poll, please? Thank you very much. So I thought I'd give you an overview of how I'm going to talk. There's a much younger picture of me, pre-PhD, so I look a lot younger, even though fewer years have passed than it looks. That is me with my first head of lettuce grown hydroponically. I thought I like to make it a bit more personal, so I'm going to tell a little bit of a story of how I got into hydroponics, and then look in general what plants need. So just understanding what they need to grow, how that translates, whether you're using a soil or not in terms of hydroponics, and then I'm going to be doing some demonstrations in between all of that. So we have a second poll to come up asking if anyone's ever grown anything hydroponically. It might still just take a few seconds because we have to do each poll as they come up, and these two are quite quick together. So hopefully we can get it up for you in a second. All right, seeing some answers coming in. Great. It looks like we've got just about everyone's answers in, so we can show the responses for that. So it seems the kind of ratio has changed quite a lot, which is great, because that's what I'm going to be talking to you about, is a lot more no's, and a lot more no's I'd like to start. So that's great. So I'm going to just give a very brief introduction to what hydroponics are, enough so that you can understand what I'm going to be saying about how I got into hydroponics and why it kind of interested me in the first place. Can I close that? Yeah. So what is hydroponics? Basically, the word comes from 2 Latin words called hydro, meaning water, and ponus, meaning work or labor. So basically, you're having the water do the work as opposed to having the soil do the work where you normally get your nutrients from. And it generally looks broadly something like this. You'll have your plants in some sort of growing media, not regular soil as you'd know it. You'll have a nutrient solution, so it's water with added nutrients, and your plant roots are going to be in there absorbing nutrients and not actually gaining anything from the soil like you would in conventional growing. So that's just a quick introduction, just so that you have an idea of what hydroponics are as I talk through how I got into it. So if you've read the blog that I posted on the Sheffield website, some of this might be repeating myself, but I think it's quite interesting because I got into hydroponics because I used to keep seeing pictures like this in my family chat. So my mom's really good at gardening. My brothers both love gardening, and they used to permanently be sending pictures of tomatoes or chilies that look beautiful, grown in the soil, and then harvest and making chili sauces and relishes. So I thought I'd have a go, and that's what my chilies looked like, which is incredibly disappointing. So I was studying engineering at the time. I figured that soil was too complex for me. I wasn't going to deal with it. I couldn't figure out when to water, when to fertilize. I was getting everything wrong. So I read about hydroponics, where you could take this out and kind of engineer a solution without soil. So this all interested me. And I then ended up spending copious hours on websites like Instructables, which, if you don't know what Instructables is, it's fantastic. It's basically a makerspace, a community where they have thousands of published methods for making almost anything you can think about. If you look at hydroponics, I think there are 2,500 different systems that you can build. This is just an example of some, and you can see some of these builds have almost 2 million views. So quite a lot of people were getting into it. So I was reading about this. Having an engineering background, I like to think of myself as a bit of a maker. I like to make things anyway, so I thought I'd have a go at this. I need to understand the science behind it though as well, which I thought the easiest way for me to absorb this was through YouTube. So once again, I just found a few channels, followed them on YouTube, watched as many videos as I can, and when I thought I was confident enough, bought myself a hydroponic food production book. I actually believe I got it as a gift, and built my first hydroponic system, which you can see on the right, which I've also published on Instructables, and then promptly build myself a second one, a bigger scale. You can see both of these are outdoors. This was when I still lived in South Africa, and I had really good success with these systems. So there's quite a range of plants that we're growing in this, what would be called a dripper system. So we've got what's called a wee bee baby pumpkin. So you can see it makes these baby little pumpkins. This was English cucumbers, which you can see some of the harvest on the right. This is a beefsteak tomato. I believe that's a green pepper. This was a baby watermelon. You can actually see a watermelon fruit kind of suspended with a Hessian sac. These are some rather interesting cucumbers called lemon cucumbers. You can see them on the right. And then on the right's another tomato bush. And these were some other harvests of various types of tomatoes. So I thought all was well. I thought I had this down, but that's never the case. You always learn as you go. So I had some problems along the way. Some of the most disappointing carrot yields, I think, that are possible. I still to this day don't know if it was due to my impatience of thinking the top looked good and pulling them out, or the fact that carrots aren't particularly well suited to hydroponics, or whether I just had my system set up wrong. I also had a whole harvest of tomatoes that came out looking like this, and this is a disease known as blossom end rot, and it's basically caused by a lack of calcium. So without knowing that, you kind of learn as you go, which is something I also really advocate for, is instead of trying to learn everything up front, learn enough to do something and then learn the rest as you go, learn from your mistakes. However, none of this really compared to the biggest problem I had, which was one of the simplest solutions. It's something I hadn't thought about. If you know anything about South African weather, we get, I lived in the Highveld, we get thunder showers, so strong winds and rains. And one morning I woke up to this. I couldn't even stay outside. Still looking at it makes me quite upset. I learned a basic lesson about attaching frames to a wall if you are expecting any sort of weather to come in. And this destroyed my whole system. All the buckets had cracked and broken. You can see a cucumber that's been split in half on the way down. Our watermelon that was suspended was snapped in half. So you learn as you go, and there's nothing you can really nothing more you can do about that. But quite luckily at the time, I guess I'd also been accepted to start my PhD at the University of Sheffield. Sorry, I'm just going to have a sip of water. So I got accepted to do a PhD through the Grantham Centre for Sustainable Futures. And now all of a sudden my hydroponic experience, even though it wasn't my formal training, basically landed me a PhD, where I was working on looking at making a new growing media for hydroponics made out of polyurethane foam, which is basically the foam that you have in your mattresses, in your chairs and furniture. So I moved to Sheffield and been working on this project. It also opened up some really incredible opportunities for me. I was privileged enough to go to Zaatari refugee camp several times, where my supervisor, Tony Ryan, had kind of identified that they had loads of waste mattresses, loads of waste PVC pipe, and were desperate to grow plants, whether they're not allowed to in the refugee camp basically plant any plants in the soil. Even if they could, it's in the middle of a desert, the soil's awful, it's saline, and it's basically clay, very difficult to work with. To compound on top of that, they had very strict water restrictions. So hydroponics kind of makes sense in this because you use a lot less water and you could keep it off the ground, which basically kept everyone happy. So I went there, and the first time I went there, we looked at using yogurt tubs, so recycled yogurt tubs, recycled foam, and in here we've got some cucumber seedlings and mint seedlings. That kind of worked, but basically we needed to spend more time. The second time we went in, and while we were gone, the refugees there had managed to build an amazing hydroponic system that was basically up and running. So there wasn't really much for us to do other than to admire their work. And this is now one of the setups in Zaatari refugee camp, and it's a gorgeous green wall of herbs. So it's been absolutely fantastic to work on that project. I also got to work with a Sheffield artist, Anthony Bennett, on a project to raise awareness about the situation in Zaatari. So this was a installation we did for the Festival of the Mind in Sheffield. Basically, Anthony sculpted these really cool sculptures. So he had a football, he had a turnip, a teddy bear, and a lion head, and they're all kind of related to Syrian folklore. And then we built this installation that looks very similar to a lot of hydroponic installations, and grew plants in these cool cool sculptures that he'd made. Right. So that leads me to one of the big things that changed when I moved to Sheffield. Was we moved from a house where we had a nice garden to work into an apartment where we have absolutely no outdoor space, and it's much harder for us to grow. So I wanted to see if how many of you have or in a similar situation to that. So the next poll should be up. Okay, that looks like we've got all of our responses. So you can show the responses, please. So that's quite interesting. I thought there might be a few more allotment gardeners, but not too many. A few people with gardens, and then quite a lot of you, almost half, don't have any outdoor space. So that's again great, because that's what I want to talk about this evening. This is the same situation we're in, and secondary to that is none of those large hydroponic systems that I showed you earlier are going to work, or at least be practical in an apartment. So we've had to scale down. So I still have some hydroponics at home, but they're grown in much smaller hydroponic setups. So on your left is just a recycled or reused takeaway pot. It's got some recycled foam in, and this was basically for the Zattery project. I was trying to make sure everything worked before we went there. So it was using foam from Zattery, and I've got some basil and mint cuttings growing. On the right is something that's available, well, no longer unfortunately available for purchase, because I really like these little systems, but you can, this one was bought from IKEA, but it's basically a commercial hydroponic system for growing at home. So it's still possible to grow at home, not as easy, but this is really what I want to talk to you about, sorry, this evening. So that's a basic history of what I've done hydroponically, or how I've gotten to where I am now. So I'd like to move on from that to start looking at what plants actually need. So I'm going to first look at this generally, look at what all plants need. This doesn't necessarily mean hydroponically, it just means what plants need when you grow them, no matter what. So there's 5 things that all plants need. They need light for photosynthesis, they need water for respiration. So much like us, they regulate their heat through water perspiration. They also use the water as building blocks to grow. They need air. Most people know that plants need CO2, but they also need oxygen, especially in their root zone. And if you don't give them oxygen in their root zone, you'll end up getting your roots rotting away and your plant dying, which is something you may have seen if you've either had really compact soil or if you've tried hydroponics ever and you haven't aerated your nutrient solution, and you end up using up all the oxygen in the nutrient solution, and then your plants end up dying. And the final thing they need, then they also need nutrients, and the final thing they need is space to grow, so that they don't compete with each other's light and water, air, nutrients. Now, if you have an outdoor space, this is just a picture of an allotment. A lot of this comes quite naturally, especially in the British summer. You get a fair amount of light. You've got several hours or long days. Water, we're, I guess, quite blessed with the amount of rain that you get in the UK. So you generally don't even need irrigation. You can do most crops you can grow without having to irrigate. So that's kind of taken care of. If you've got a well-draining soil and you keep it that way, you make sure you keep it quite porous, then your plants will have no problem with air, either oxygen or carbon dioxide. Generally, if you have a healthy soil, you don't even have to worry about nutrients. I guess you will often be subsidizing what's already in the soil with fertilizer or manure or something like that. And space to grow, well, you've got your outdoor space, so that's great. It's much more difficult if you have an apartment that looks something like this. I had to Google to try find a dark apartment, and this kind of made me cringe because I can't imagine having to grow plants in something with no windows and very little natural light. But people have apartments like this, so I'm going to talk you through how we can still grow stuff at home if your apartment looks like this. But quite obviously, you don't have the light you would outdoors. You're also likely, if you're growing indoors, to be growing in containers, so from small pots to whatever fits on your windowsill, I guess. And then water becomes much more of a problem. You have to make sure you water your plants. If you forget to water them, you end up with your plants wilting. You're also much more likely to use up all the nutrients that is in the soil. So, sorry, you have quite a few more problems when you're looking at trying to grow plants inside. So this is also where I think hydroponics really fit in nicely. So we have another poll just to ask you what you would like to grow hydroponically, if you have any ideas. Great, thank you very much. So we've got some microgreens, a few for beans and pulses, but it looks like mostly herbs and fruit and veggies. Well, I've got some great news. I'm going to be covering most of that for you today. Herbs especially and microgreens, mostly because they're the easiest to do. I think it's a great starting point for anyone. Fruit and veggies can be a little tougher indoors, but they're definitely doable. As I'll show you some photos later anyway of some tomatoes I've grown in our apartment. Great, thank you. We can hide that. So once again, I'd now like to kind of talk about how hydroponics differ. So we're still trying to meet those 5 things that plants need, no matter what. They need light, they need water, they need air, they need nutrients, and they need space. But what we're doing is we're taking out the soil to grow it in a soilless fashion. So that leads to a few problems, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, your soil often has the nutrients in. That's also where it absorbs water through. It gives your plant a support, so it holds your plant upright. So how are we going to do that without soil? Well, luckily there's been quite a lot of development of growing media, they call it, which is basically an inert substrate that you use to hold up your plant, and that's all it's doing. It's giving it a physical support. So it's helping out with the space, but it's not giving any nutrients, which is obviously a massive problem. So how do we counter that we no longer have the nutrients? Well, we use a nutrient solution, which is basically inorganic fertilizer compounds that are added to your water so that your plants are able to get everything that they need. So I'm going to talk about those 2 things separately. I'm going to talk about growing media, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about nutrient solutions. So I thought I'd show you a few growing media. I also have some with me that I'll talk you through. So the first 4 being these kind of round pellets, this and the 2 below are all made from expanded rock. So you basically blow up rock at a really high temperature, and then it basically expands like popcorn would. They're very good in terms of hydroponic growing media because they never change. They stay the same with time. They never degrade. But that's not great from an environmental point of view. Even though they're inorganic rocks, they do not degrade. So we're done using them, they basically end up in landfill. And this is where my project came in. My PhD project. I was looking at using a polymer foam with the idea that we can make it recyclable, ideally first reusable, so use it for several growing seasons, and then at the end of life we can recycle it, which is what we're still looking at now, which is hopefully a benefit. Then you also get organic growing media, as they're known. So these 2 on the right, this is wood bark, so you can use wood bark. It's got everything you need. It's kind of porous and will hold up a plant. And at the bottom is coco coir, which is made from coconut husks. And these are both great from an environmental standpoint because they're a waste product from a different stream. So bark is a waste product from the logging industry, and coconut husks obviously from coconut farms. But the problem with these is that they change over time. So if you have a hydroponic system that you're growing for a year or 2, they'll start degrading in that time and their physical properties change, and you can end up with a waterlogged solution, which means you're no longer giving the plants the air that they need, and you can run into big problems with root rot. So these all kind of have a benefit and a drawback, and it all kind of depends on what type of hydroponic farmer you want to be. So I'm going to hopefully this works. Yes. So what I've got over here is just a few different growing media, types of growing media that I'll show you. This is rock wool. This is kind of the industry standard. This is what everyone uses in industrial greenhouses. From a health and safety point of view, and working with it is not really pleasant. It's kind of like fiberglass. Lots of people who work with it on a day-to-day basis say they kind of struggle with, they're itchy by the end of the day, and they just don't generally like working with it. You also have to rinse it before you use it, so it's kind of got some pre-steps. That's not great because when it's made with I think limestone, so that changes the pH of your nutrient solution. So you have to rinse it and give it a a pre-wash before. Then I'll show you some of these if I can get them up. So this is just one of the kind of rock substrates. Hopefully you can all see this. It's called leca, or lightweight expanded clay aggregate. Here's one that's been broken open. So you can see it's kind of quite porous, the media. These also, I'll show you, you have to wash before because they're covered in dirt. So I'll just put some water on it. I'm not sure how well you'll see it. Unfortunately, not as well as it hoped, but you might be able to see that the water is kind of a bit brown. I'll get one more in there. You can see it's kind of washing all the dust that's on these rocks off, and then you end up. So again, that's something that you have to think about, and this kind of goes with all of these expanded rocks. So that's perlite, again, very light. Same problems. They all need to be washed beforehand and have some sort of pre-processing before you use them, because they because of the way they're manufactured, that you end up with bits of dust that kind of sticks to them. So those are the more conventional types of growing media that you get. However, that's definitely not all. I really am a advocate for experimenting. If you've got anything you think that will work, try it. So these are some more unconventional growing media. Two of these are again from a waste stream. So this is rice hulls. So that's been used quite a lot. Again, it has problems with degradation. Biochar is getting quite a lot of press at the moment for use as a growing media or as part of a growing media. So that's basically just charcoal made from a specific process. And then on the right, this might look very similar to the other rocks that I've shown you, and it is. The only difference being it's natural forming volcanic rock. At the bottom here, this is a picture from one of my colleagues at the Grantham Center, some work she did for her master's, Nicole, where she was using almond shells that they were grinding and homogenizing to different sizes. And on the right is a recycled plastic plank that they were also using to grow lettuce in. And all of these worked. All of these work that you see here. The problem is you often have to sacrifice yield. So big hydroponic farms don't often use these media. They just look at yield and try and stick with what gives them the best yield. But if you're doing it at home, I really think you should basically experiment with anything you've got. If you've got something at home that you think might work, try it. This guy on the right is pretty much the most absurd example I've seen of a growing media, and that's that he built a whole greenhouse out of Lego, including the growing media. But I did find this on the Sun newspaper, and there's a few things that make me a bit suspect. Is that I'm not 100% sure this plant is growing in this Lego, and also he's holding what looks like either peaches, I think, which there's no ways he has peach trees in those greenhouse. So I'm not 100% convinced, but I like the idea either way that he's using Lego blocks to grow plants. So if you're thinking about this, what would you have to look for in terms of properties from anything you could use for growing media? So one is density. You generally want something that's quite low density, but it needs to have enough weight to hold your plant upright. It needs to be porous so that you can get the air transfer that we're talking about. Generally, you want a neutral pH. We'll talk a little bit more about pH in a second. You want it to have as inert chemical composition as possible. So basically, you don't want it interfering with your nutrient solution, because if you do that, you have to keep adjusting your nutrient solution, and it just kind of ends up in this back and forth of trying to fix a problem that didn't need to be there. And then the final one is sanitation. I know I'm telling you to go ahead and try anything, but obviously just be aware and don't use something that could be toxic or poisonous as a growing media, and don't use something that could possibly have loads of bacterial life or things that could go wrong in that sense as well. But some other great examples that I've seen are peanut shells or pistachio shells. Nut shells are great. Again, you just need to rinse them, because if you've bought peanuts or almonds or anything like that, they've likely been had salt added to them, so you would like to just rinse that salt off. But I've also seen some people use paper mulch, where they've kind of half recycled and wet cardboard and grown plants. So go for it, try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it does work, great, you found something new that you can use, and especially if it's a waste product from another stream. So we're going to have to get a little bit technical, because this does need to be addressed, and those are the nutrients that plants need. So the three major ones that plants need are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. These are normal. You don't really need to worry about too much, because water and your air circulation take care of that. Plants will get their carbon and oxygen from CO2 and O2, and they'll get their hydrogen and oxygen from water. So generally in hydroponics or in soil, you don't have to worry about that. Then there's probably a few of these that you would have heard of, NPK, especially nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, but calcium, magnesium, and sulfur also fall into this next group that are the macro elements that all plants need. So even if you've never done hydroponics, but you've grown plants, you may have often used a fertilizer, and if you've used a fertilizer, you're normally going to look at the NPK values, and it might have something on it like super mag or super cal, so saying that they're adding calcium or magnesium. So you'd get some of this from the soil if you grew in the soil. Otherwise, you might use a fertilizer, or you could use something like manure that's going to introduce a lot of these elements if you were growing outside. Again, now if we're taking the soil away and we're taking away the ability to use manure or things like that, we're going to have to be looking at fertilizers, right? But it gets even more complicated than that, because even though you have these macronutrients, you also have micronutrients that plants need. So some of these, or the rest of the micronutrients are listed: iron, manganese, boron, molybdenum, copper, zinc, chlorine, silicon. And these all have different functions in plants. But if you were a soil gardener, you normally wouldn't worry about this, because you get almost all your micronutrients from your soil and from the microbiome and from decomposing matter and all those sorts of things. So you generally don't have to worry too much about micronutrients. But in hydroponics, because you're starting with nothing, you're obviously going to have to add this all in. Now, to compound that problem, so first, this is kind of a table. I don't expect anyone to go through it. I can send it to you afterwards if anyone's really interested. But this basically just describes what each of these compounds do and what percentage they make up of a plant. So you can see the micronutrients make up very little of a plant, from 0.01% of the plant mass all the way down to 0.00001% of plant mass. Obviously, carbon and oxygen, hydrogen make up the bulk of the plant. And you can also kind of read what each of these do. So we now have to do this in hydroponics, but it gets a little more complex than that, because plants absorb nutrients at different pHs. So these are kind of the ideal range for pH. So you would have even heard about this in soil. You know your pH range that you want soil. But for hydroponics, this is even more important, because you can see if you're working, say, at a pH of 8 or 9, these micronutrients are not going to be absorbed at all by the plant, and you're going to start seeing deficiency problems in your plant immediately. So it's generally accepted for hydroponics that you need a pH between 5.5 and 6.5. And you can see if we kind of go down the list between 5.5 and 6.5, almost everything's being absorbed in the maximum ratio. So that's great, but it all seems quite complex at this point, doesn't it? So I do want to ask you if you think hydroponics seems daunting. Sorry about the spelling mistake. All right, it looks like we've got quite a lot of responses in. Can we have a look? So I did think going through the nutrients might be a little bit daunting, but it is something you kind of at least need to have an idea about a little bit, So we can see it looks like just over half of you, and maybe a few hiding in the no response crew didn't want to answer yes. But this is something I did want to address. Thanks for the poll. We can take that down now, please. So I've got this quote from Albert Einstein. It says, "The more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know." And this is something I find with almost all hobbies. I consider growing hydroponically a hobby. Is the more you learn, the more there is to learn, the more in depth it gets. But I'm also a real advocate for not having to learn everything, because somebody else would have worked this all out, right, and figured out a way. And this is often known as a black box approach. So you just kind of know what you're putting in, know what you want to get out, and just ignore. There's just a black box that does the stuff in the middle. And I definitely think this is a great starting point for doing hydroponics. And luckily, like I mentioned, there's normally somebody else who's already taken a daunting situation and made it much easier. And in this case, it's the nutrient companies. So this is an example of a 2-part hydroponic nutrient. This is what I have at home. And what you can see is that basically all those compounds we looked at earlier are in these two parts of concentrated nutrient solution. So you're like, oh, okay, great, but what about all those ratios? Well, they've also taken account for that. So they've done this very carefully. It's been put in 2 parts because when it's really concentrated, you can have chemical reactions between these compounds. So they're basically keeping those chemical reactions separate so that it stays stable over time. And then they know very well which nutrients do that. And then they've incorporated all those nutrients we looked at into just a 2-part solution. And to add to that, they give you a feeding guide. So they literally tell you, if you're, depending on where you are in your crop growth, you simply add 1 milliliter per liter of water of part A, 1 milliliter of part B. So these are some amendments that you can use. I've never used them at home. I think you would start looking at that when you're trying to grow flowering crops, because it gets a little bit more complicated. But for any leafy greens, for herbs, lettuces, microgreens, anything like that, you can basically just pick a value. So I normally use this week 2, which is 1 milliliter per liter of part A, 1 milliliter of part B, mix it together in a liter of water, and you're done. But you might be thinking, but hold on, you were telling me that I need to measure the pH, I need to understand that. Sorry, let me mention one other nutrient solution. So this is a different brand, and they just sell a single 1-part nutrient, and they literally just tell you on it, just add 10 milliliters per liter of water for hydroponics. Simple as that. You don't need to do any calculations. You don't need to think about it. So even though there's all that science and chemistry that needs to go into what a plant grows, the nutrient solution companies have generally already done all the work for you, which is fantastic. You can also get, if you're wanting to be or wanting to grow organically, there's been a big increase now in organic hydroponic nutrient solutions which you can get. So this BioBiz BioGrow is a hydroponic organic nutrient. You can also, once you if you've, I'd say, first come to terms with hydroponics and start looking at more extravagant ways. So this is compost tea. So if you've ever had a compost heap, you can basically run it anaerobically or aerobically, and with microbes, that basically the liquid that comes out is known as compost tea, and that's really high in all these nutrients you need, and you can use that in hydroponics. The problem comes in that it's not as simple as reading the ingredients list off the back and knowing what's in there. You don't know exactly what ratio of nutrients you have, so it's more of a trial and error. You're going to add some, see what happens. If your plant starts showing symptoms of deficiency, or if they start showing symptoms of toxicity, then you know they've either had too little or too much, and you have to adjust your strength. It's also variable over time, so if you change what you put into your compost heap, your compost teas will come out differently. But it's something I advocate completely for, is trying these things. The third one is incredibly controversial. Don't just try it as I say it, but you basically get a subset of hydroponics called anthropoponics or ponics, which is basically using urine to grow your plants. We pee out quite a lot of fertilizer. Basically, please don't just go and if you want to attempt this, don't just go pee into a bottle and grow plants in it and then eat the plants. Go read up a little bit on it, because there are obviously some food safety issues that can be problematic if you're using urine. But it's definitely something that can be done and is done, especially at the hobbyist level. It doesn't really work commercially, mostly because I think it would be a really hard sell. I don't think the population's ready to eat food grown in diluted pee. And then the final thing you can do, again, this is something I'm not going to talk about it today, but I really suggest if you're interested in hydroponics, is you research aquaponics. It's absolutely fantastic way of reducing your inputs that you put into a hydroponic system. What you do is you raise fish, you feed the fish, whatever food they don't eat plus their waste gets turned into fertilizer via microbes and bacteria, and then you feed your plants that. It can be as complicated as having building size systems where you're growing fish for food and you're growing crops for food, and you have this whole setup. But quite simply, I've also seen people that just take a jug full of their fish tank water and put it into a hydroponic system like the one I showed you earlier, or I can show you now actually. So something like this, and it works fantastically well. So if you have fish already, you can skip all the fertilizer and just give it a go with your fish water. But I'm not going to talk too much about aquaponics this afternoon or this evening. Back to nutrient solution. So what I was mentioning about pH is you're probably saying to me, but you're kind of telling me that I need to have it in certain quantities and I need to have it at a certain pH. What do I need to buy and how do I need to measure it? So you can, if you so choose, buy something like this. They're about 15 quid on Amazon. So they're not very expensive. They come as a set. The one measures pH, the other one measures total dissolved solids, or EC, which is the electrical conductivity of the nutrient solution, which is basically a measure of how much fertilizer there is in the water. But I kind of want to prove to you, and I haven't done this, so I really hope it works, that you don't need anything. All you need to do is trust the fertilizer companies, basically. So let me see if I can get you to my demonstration. Yes. And then I need to find, I appear to have lost my, so I'm going to get my two nutrient solutions, and you're just going to have to give me a second. I appear to have misplaced, here it is. Sorry, I've got a whole bunch of things and it's a bit difficult to keep track. So this is just water in a 1 liter container. To prove that to you, I'm first going to get my EC meter. This is a rather complex one. I don't actually have one at work, so if that tells you even further, I don't have one at home, that tells you even further that I don't think you need one. I had to fetch one from, or get one from work. Hopefully, no, I was having problems with the batteries on this earlier. I hope they haven't gone flat. Or perhaps it's just that there's no nutrient in, so it's not showing up. Okay, well, we'll leave that for now, because the more important thing I wanted to show you was the pH. So I have one of those pH meters similar to the one you've seen. Again, I have this at home, but I actually use it for a different hobby, which is my home brewing. I don't really use it for hydroponics. So what you can see there, hopefully, is that the pH at the moment of this water is 7.5. That's obviously above what we want for hydroponics. We wanted, like I said earlier, somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5. And in general, the nutrients that the nutrient companies sell you nowadays have already got some pH stabilizing compounds in there. So I'm just going to measure out some of that. I just need to get my syringe. Right, so I've measured out 1 milliliter of that. As I showed you earlier on the, oh, sorry, I see my screen's gone on. As I showed you earlier, that was kind of what I use always at home. So I'm going to add that in. I'm just going to rinse the syringe. So that's the first part. And then I'm going to get the second part of the nutrient solution. And I'm going to measure out a milliliter of that. Pop that in. Rinse out my syringe. And I'm just going to quickly close this and give it a shake to ensure it's well mixed. And let's hope this works. So I'm going to pop the pH meter in again. You can see the pH is going down. And that's at 6.1, which is almost smack bang in the middle where we wanted to be. So I've done nothing other than add nutrient solution. I haven't had to adjust the pH, and that would be basically, that would be me done making my hydroponic solution for a hydroponic setup at home. I'll see if this EC meter is, let me just double check. Oh, yes. So you can see it kind of flashing, and it's showing a EC between 1.2 and 1.4. And if we go back to this graph, I was using 1 mil of each. I didn't necessarily measure it out as accurately as I could have, but you can see we're basically where we needed to be in terms of the amount of fertilizer that's in there as well. So hopefully all of you have answered yes, that seems really daunting. That's all there is to it. I've shown you that I could use the ECN pH meter, but it's actually not necessary because the fertilizer company takes care of everything for you. Right, so we've now got a growing media, we've got a nutrient solution, but what does an actual hydroponic system look like? So I thought I'd talk you through what these look like. In its simplest form, you get something called a wicking system, where you'll have your nutrient solution. So if we're always thinking about giving the plants air, we're giving them nutrient, and we're giving them water and space. These are the things we need to give them in a hydroponic system. We're assuming we're getting light either from the sun or a electric light source. But in this kind of system, you have a wick that goes into a nutrient solution. You have your plant in some sort of substrate, one of the ones we've mentioned, and basically the wick is going to soak up your nutrient solution, meaning that your media doesn't get completely saturated. It's not going to be soaking wet, which means you've still got space for air. So you're getting air exchange, you're getting water, and you're getting nutrients. And if there's an example on the right, there's a brand, I think it's a German brand, that makes what they call self-watering pots. They actually sell it for the houseplant community. I have one I can show you. I have several of these around my house. I use them for both for hydroponics and for growing houseplants. I even grow some houseplants hydroponically in them. So what they look like, they're basically a pot. You can see there's a wick at the bottom. That pot comes out and you can see the wicks. There's nothing else in the bottom. That basically sits in there, and you have a indicator for your nutrient solution level, and then you can fill that with your growing media and put your plant in it. I think they're absolutely fantastic, and I'm surprised they don't sell themselves as a hydroponic growing pot. I can show you so that's one of our house plants. Growing in the lightweight expanded clay aggregate. So there's no soil there. And if I take that out, you'll see the wicks again. So it's a slightly different system. And I think I might be able to show you there's some roots coming out of the bottom. So it's probably getting a bit too big for the system because you don't necessarily want the roots sitting in the nutrient solution completely, because then you risk it using up all the oxygen. But so that's the simplest system. I think they're really well suited for growing at home. If we move to a slightly more complex system, you get something that looks like this. It's called a deep deep water culture. So in this system, the difference is that your entire substrate is submerged in the nutrient solution, but because of that, you need to make sure that you're constantly giving your roots enough air. So you normally do that by using an aquarium air pump and an air stone inside your nutrient tank that basically dissolves the oxygen into the nutrient solution, and then you don't have any problems with root rot. Systems like this is like the one I showed you earlier over here. So this is from IKEA. I'm really disappointed that they don't sell them anymore, because I think I've got about 3 of them, and I've probably sold another 2 or 3 to colleagues who've who've asked me what to get. So you can see this is again in the clay aggregate. You can see in this case the roots. Can you see? Yeah, the roots are growing into the nutrient solution that's below. I also have some lettuce that's just starting off in perlite. Okay, that one's roots aren't out. I have some basil in vermiculite. So I was kind of trying to show you all the different possibilities. I even have to show you what I meant when just try it. This is a cut up PET bottle, Coke bottle, that I've basically just shredded with a pair of scissors, and you can see roots starting to come through. Although I will say it was much harder to get a seed to start growing in that than the more conventional mediums. And then the ones at the back are from the foam. I make it work. They're just quite wet, so but careful to drip everywhere. The only problems I've had with this system is when the plants are small, they don't necessarily absorb enough nutrient. So this doesn't have an aerator in, which I think could be a benefit to these kinds of systems, is to have an air pump and a air stone, just to make sure that you never use up all the oxygen in the nutrient solution. The way they account for that is they hope that you use the plants absorb enough that the level drops, that some of the roots are in exposed to air and some are exposed to the nutrient solution. But if your plants aren't using up the nutrient fast enough, then you end up with the problem of no oxygen in your root zone again. Right, the next system is something called ebb and flow. These next few systems are more suited to outdoors, I think. I'm definitely not telling you not to do them inside. Just generally bigger systems, and they're generally more what hydroponic greenhouses use. So ebb and flow uses a system where you have a pump on a timer. The pump fills your tray to the top, and then when your timer goes off and the pump stops, then the whole system drains down to a low level. So your roots are constantly going into nutrient solution, out of nutrient solution, into nutrient solution, out of nutrient solution. That ensures that they're getting water, air, and nutrients. And this then all feeds back into your nutrient reservoir tank that holds all your nutrients, so you don't waste anything. So everything's a bit more circular. And this system on the right, the example I've used is the one I built at my home in South Africa that I showed right at the beginning. So there's a pump in the bottom there. The pump's attached to a timer, and it's just feeding these 2 cat litter boxes basically that are held together with PVC piping, fills them to the top, and when it goes off, then it drains again. The next type of system is known as a nutrient film technique. How this works, it's normally done in drain pipes or guttering pipes, and you have your plant's roots just touching the bottom of your guttering. They obviously have to already be established because you need the roots to touch the bottom, and then you feed in your nutrient from the top, and it runs down via gravity and drips back into your reservoir tank. And again, you're not having problems with aeration because the water is constantly moving and in contact with air. So I have a couple of examples here. The picture on the left is a NFT system I built at my parents' house in Cape Town. So I finally convinced my mom to not only grow in soil, but to try out hydroponics, and she loves it. They get all their basil. You can see there's loads of spinach growing in there at the moment from their hydroponic system. And she's basically taken the simple approach of she measures out her nutrients puts them in a tank, and that's all she does. She doesn't, she can't be bothered to try learn more about the exactly what's going on, which is great. I think she's still able to grow plants and isn't kind of worrying about the chemistry in the all along. And then on the right is a picture from Zatari refugee camp and showing their tomatoes. And this is, again, it's using the same system. They've just got their nutrient tank buried underground to keep it cool. The greenhouse also looks really dirty because they're using basically sand as shielding or mud as shielding because they get too much light and it gets too hot. So to keep it a bit cooler, and that pumps to the top, which also has a reservoir tank, and that flows all the way down these pipes and back into the nutrient solution at the bottom. The final system I'd like to talk about is dripper irrigation systems. So this works by having your plants grown in a substrate completely and then feeding it with dripper irrigation that obviously drips through the substrate and then returns to a nutrient container. This can also be done on a timer. And again, you'll notice with all these systems, they're just basically ingenious ideas of doing the same thing, making sure your plants get nutrients, air, and water the whole time. So they're just different ideas and they all are suited for different applications. So these are just some dripper systems that I've built. The one on the right is the one I showed you also in our house in Pretoria. So at the front, you can see that's actually the return line, and there's a dripper coming in at the back of each of these. And then when it runs through the media, it runs to the front and back into the hydroponic nutrient tank, which is covered by this foliage at the moment. And then on the left is one that I built for my PhD. So you can see all the drippers in this case running to the tops of each one of these pots. And then there's a hole drilled in this big 1 meter by 1 meter saucer that returns back into the nutrient tank. So again, keeping everything circular. So what's suitable for all of those that are indoors? I definitely think a wicking system and the deep water systems are the most appropriate. I think they're fantastic. That's all I use in our apartment, but you're welcome to try everything and build anything that you can imagine. I'd love to see pictures of kind of extravagant NFT systems in people's houses. That sounds fantastic. So what we haven't covered is if you had this dark apartment, what can you do? Well, the first and rather obvious solution is if you have space on your windowsills, you just put your plants on your windowsills. East and west facing windows, I find in the UK are best. South facing, they can get a bit too much sun, and north facing, you get no sun really. But if, like me, all your windowsills are already taken up with houseplants and hydroponic systems and whatnot, then you're probably going to start looking at grow lights. You can get them really cheap. I mean, if you put grow lights into Amazon, you get 2,000 plus kind of results. So it's really starting to take off. Lots of people are buying them. I don't particularly like these red and blue LEDs that you can get, mostly because it makes your room look quite strange. It also makes the plants look quite strange. You can't really tell if they look healthy or not. I prefer using full spectrum bulbs, which basically supply all the colors. So the one on the right, again, I'm going to be endorsing IKEA. That's basically a bulb. You can just screw it into any light fitting that you already have, and they're not too expensive. But obviously, if you don't have windows and you can't get light, that's just about the only way you can do it. Right, so I've got one more poll. Hopefully you're all still with me. Just asking why you want to grow plants. Almost just grabbed the wrong bottle and drank the nutrient solution I just made. Right, great. Can we show those? Fantastic, thank you. So it looks like the majority is for sustainability, and then a few for mental health and or mental well-being and health. I think those are all incredibly important. I really like the answer of mental well-being. I think it's incredibly lethargic to grow plants. You're kind of nurturing something from a seed into all the way up into something you can harvest and eat. I think everyone should at least try it. From a sustainability point of view, I'm definitely going to still talk a little bit more about that. I've mentioned some kind of waste materials you can use and how to do that, but I am going to also show you a few more examples of things I've done at home. I think I may have, oh no, right. So let's have a look at a few examples, right? So I think you might be thinking, where do I start? What's the first thing I can do? I'm keen now. I've been convinced. I think if you haven't done it before, growing microgreens is fantastic. It's a great way to get started. You can do them hydroponically. If you don't have or don't want to start with hydroponics, you can grow them in soil. Basically, there's a few different types you can do. My favorite is cress. So basically, all you do, I should have to be able to show you an example of this as well. It's going to be a little bit of a, well, I prepared these earlier, but I hope you're all okay with that. So all I have here is some cress seeds on some wet tissue paper that I wet earlier. And on top of that, I've just got an old saucer. That's just to keep them in the dark, because seeds are obviously used to being under soil and not just being on the surface. They also like to push up against something when they start growing, because they're used to having to push out of the soil. So this will just make them a bit stronger. And in a couple of days, I'll likely have something like that where it's actually pushing itself off. So that'll be in a few days. I then also have a John West tuna pot that's got some that I started a few days ago, so they're starting to go. You can see a few of the seeds starting to germinate. The great thing about doing microgreens is they have enough nutrient in their seed, so you're only going to be keeping them for 5 or 6 days, so you don't even have to give them fertilizer. And then in about 8 days, you'll have something that looks like this. So this is a nice set of microgreens. This one was grown in soil just because I was doing a few different things. And you can see all the healthy roots coming through the tiny bit of soil that they're in. But again, microgreens you can do in anything. I'll be growing those ones that are on the tissue paper all the way on tissue paper. I've on the foam I use at work. I've got some on rock wool. But basically, yeah, I think it's a fantastic way to start and fantastic place to start, because all you need to do is buy yourself some seeds, sprinkle them on something wet, and then you'll have some microgreens to garnish your salad or your dinner with in a week. I think the next step up, especially for all the apartment gardeners out there, is to possibly look at either buying or make yourself a system that looks similar to these. The one I've got, I've explained, is from IKEA. I think this one is from Aldi, and it costs, I think, £50, and that's got a light built in, an LED light, a nutrient reservoir, and all the kind of little kits and pieces you'll need to plant up your own hydroponics. I think they don't use a growing media at all. I think they use these little green pieces of plastic that kind of hold your plant upright, and then your plant's roots are just submerged. So that's cool. I definitely think that's where you need to go. You can either buy your seeds. I'm a bit cheap and a bit lazy sometimes, so what I do is I'll just go buy some herbs and then propagate them in water. You just dump them in water and wait till they form roots, and save yourself a bit of money. I also find that they last longer, they survive longer anyway. If you buy basil, just keep it in water. And if it roots, then you've got yourself a whole new basil plant. So if you're doing something like this, all you need to buy yourself or make yourself is a kit. If you've got a windowsill that gets light, I'll just use a old takeaway container or something like that, cut some holes into it, and then you will have to unfortunately buy some nutrient solution, but that's about all you'll need to buy, and then you can do your first hydroponic setup at home. If you get more experience and you want to try something a bit more complex, then I'd suggest looking at growing vegetables and fruiting crops. The problem with these are when you start producing fruit, the nutrients that plants require changes drastically. But like I mentioned earlier, you don't really have to worry about it. You just look at what the fertilizer company tells you to do and just do that. So it is definitely possible. Also, you have to take into account growing something like a cucumber is pretty tough in an apartment, mostly because of the space. That's the biggest issue because they're big plants. Like I say, can be done. This is a tomato grown in a tiny little 1 liter hydroponic pot with foam from work-in, and it eventually took up this entire window and all our light in our kitchen. It was actually more of a hassle than anything by the end, but it can definitely be done. You can see some fruit on it. So this one we managed to take to fruit in the apartment. It was kind of held up to the curtain railings or the blind railings at the top, and but you can definitely do it. So go for it. I have one final poll, seeing as we're talking about sustainability, which is just to ask you, how often do you buy imported food? All right, can we make those visible? So yeah, this is kind of what I expected, especially in the UK. Basically, it's really hard not to, right? You grab something off the shelf, you get home, you have a look at your packet, and somehow your basil was grown in Spain. So I really advocate for growing at home. More, there's the mental well-being, there's the sustainability aspect of it. I think it's just absolutely fantastic. I think whether you grow, please don't get me wrong, whether you grow hydroponically or in soil, I think you should just grow. You should just start, just do it. Whatever you've got, use it. Again, reusing materials to minimize any inputs. So in the middle there, that's the basil I was talking about. That would have been sitting in water for a week. It's rooted and still alive. And what has been rooted, I've just put into a feta cup. I've discovered these lately and they were a revolution. I'll show you one in a second. And another option is when you've cut your spring onion ends off, there's no reason not to plant these. If you just plant these, you'll get a whole another spring onion grow, as I should be able to show you. So let's start with the spring onion. So that's a 2 spring onions growing, and you can still see where they were, I think. Let me just turn. There we go. You can still see where they were cut. These are again grown in my work foam, and you can start seeing some small little roots coming out the side. So these have just about re-rooted themselves, which is great. What I really like, and then this is those same basil I showed you earlier, has now been moved over into hydroponics from the water. They're still recovering a little bit from the time spent in the water and the supermarket and rerouting themselves. But what's really cool about these feta cups is you can basically take out, it's like having a wicking system inside your cup. So you should be able to see a whole bunch of roots starting to come out. And this is also just about settled. But like I say, I'm an advocate for when you see things at home you think you could use, please do it. Go ahead. And I think, yeah, that's the final thing I wanted to say is use your imagination. There's nothing limiting you really from what you can do. Go have fun. It's something I think we all need this year, is to have a little bit of fun and try new things and bring yourself joy if you're locked in at home. So I'd like to end there. Use your imagination, grow your own crops, and give hydroponics a try. Thank you.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Harry for the amazing talk. It was really good. And now we are opening the question and answer session. And we have noted down some questions from the chat, which I would like to say. The first one is from Natasha, who is asking about what are microgreens?
Oh, so microgreens are basically just a name we've given, we as humans, to crops that you harvest really quickly. So you basically harvest them when they produce their first leaves. So I might still actually need this. So let me share, then I can show you on my cameras. So basically, when a seed starts growing, let's see if I can get one out. It'll look, oh, it's a bit small, but you might just about be able to see. So you can still see the seed, you can see the root, and you can see the first two leaves. And basically, when it makes the next two leaves, those are known as your first real leaves. And when you harvest crops like that, they call them microgreens. But it's basically just small vegetables or small leafy greens. You can do it with beans or sprouts. Cress is a good one. Mustard works. And I think arugula is also really good. But it's basically just really, really young plants that are only 5 to 10 days old.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Harry. Natasha, so you have been unmuted, and I think you can directly ask the questions to Harry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi there.
Oh yeah, hi. First of all, thank you very much. Your talk is very interesting.
I'm glad.
I enjoy it dearly. I have few questions, which basically I'm just going to read it from the chat. Is plant food a nutrient solution? Because I purchased them from Wickers for my flower. Is it the same thing?
Yeah, so I was going to talk a little bit about that because I also have kind of houseplant food or flower food, and it'll definitely work. Chances are it won't have everything you need, all the micronutrients especially, but it'll probably have the macro elements. And for a lot of leafy greens and kind of herbs, you can actually get away with using something like that. So if you've got it, if that's what you've got at home, I'd give it a go.
All right. I have a few more questions. Can I just blast all the questions so that I don't come and go? So if let's say I have fish and so that means I don't have to have any fertilizer at all, right?
Yeah.
And do I need to feed them with some special fish foods or something, or is this a normal pet food?
No, just normal fish food. So basically, what you feed fish is quite similar to what you feed plants. So you often feed fish, and they won't eat all their food, and then they'll also poo out, some nutrients. So you can just use that water. Again, it's not going to be as accurate as using a nutrient solution made by a specific company, but you're definitely going to be able to just use that in your hydroponic system.
All right. Do you experience a situation where your plants become small and short, like the leaves become like it's not supposed at its own size? And if that happen, what should we do?
So if you're getting smaller leaves, that generally means your plant's not happy about something. It's quite hard to judge immediately what it could be. It could be that it's not getting enough light. It could be that it's not getting enough nutrients. It could be it's unlikely that it's a watering problem because your leaves would droop before you see that. My guess would be that they're either not getting enough nutrients, or that they're not getting enough light. But normally, if they're not getting enough light, they'll get leggy as well. So you'll kind of get really tall plants with small leaves coming out.
Okay, so talking about light, do I have to switch it on like the whole day and night, or is it like only throughout the days? Because that's how sun works.
That's a really good question. So plants need to sleep as well. So I have all of my lights on 16 hours on 8 hours off, but you could also have it on 12 hours on, 12 hours off.
Mm-hmm.
But generally plants need a minimum of 8 hours to be in the dark. So you do 16 as a maximum.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great talk.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thanks, Elena and Harry. So the next question is from Philly, who's asking that what should we look out for when you say we might be able to find the growing media around us? Are there any perfect options?
Well, so you need to be able to, basically, it needs to be something that can give the plant support. For the first part, you ideally want it to be chemically inert, so you don't want it to interfere with your nutrient solution. You want it to be porous, so to have holes in it so that the air can flow through. Those are the three major things I'd look for. I did list some examples in terms of kind of nutshells are great. You can use sand. Some people use river sand or gravel from rivers. Just again, when you're using something like gravel, especially if you've say bought it from a store, you'd want to just rinse it because there's obviously going to be lots of dust kind of coating it. So I generally just rinse anything that I use, but you could use rocks like that. Bark, moss works. So there's a very large range. They just obviously work to different extents, and you can either try and research that beforehand or just give it a go and see if you can get it to work.
Cool. And another thing she's asking is, can you give an idea how much do the Hydro A and B solutions cost?
I can. I think those were just under £20 for a liter of each. That would make at 1 milliliter per liter, so that'd make 1,000 liters of nutrient solution. And to put that in perspective, I bought these when I moved to Sheffield, which was 4 years ago, and have been growing hydroponically basically that whole time, and I still haven't finished them. So they're not incredibly cheap to buy, but once you have them, they do last a long time.
Okay, thanks, Harry. And then other question is from Ebenezer, who's asking that, do you have any other ideas about other fertilizers that we can use?
So what was brought up earlier was if you have plant food, any other plant food, so if you have anything for house plants or for flowers, you can use that. If you've somebody who's got a worm farm, I mean that's probably very few of you, but kind of worm tea is fantastic. Trying to think, I know some people try and make up their own solutions from kind of household compounds, but I don't really. I think it's just too much effort. It's not worth it. I think those are kind of the main ones I'd stick with.
Okay, I think that answers the question of Susanna, right? Susanna was asking about using wormity actually. So you've already mentioned it.
Sorry, yeah, I must have missed it.
Yeah, so Elena was also asking that, can we use something which replaces the industrial A and B bottles, something which is more organic, let's say?
Yeah, so you can either, if you choose to, you can buy a hydroponic solution that is organic. So if you choose to do that, that's available on the market. The other organic options are some of those that I mentioned, where if you can either use compost teas or fish water, those kinds of things. But if you just want to straight up, I'd prefer to use something organic. Then I'd suggest just looking for organic hydroponic nutrient, because that gives you the option again of knowing exactly what's going in, but you also have the benefit of being organic. And you can, I know people use like seaweed emulsions as well, but again, you'll have to trial and error that, because it's going to be different from batch to batch, and that. So go for it, but it's not going to be as simple, because you won't know the exact inputs that you're putting in.
Thank you, Henry. I think I've been given the go ahead to use the microphone. I'm Elena. I asked the question about the organic sort of nutrients. Like I think my question is more to do with kind of the overall system. Can it actually ever be defined as organic based on the fact that you sort of do rely on buying nutrients if you want to be accurate with what you're doing? So it's not completely a closed system, which to my understanding is quite important in organic horticulture anyway.
Yeah, so I know in the US you can now get certified organic hydroponics. I think it's not a very popular thing to say, but I actually think hydroponics is better than organic because you use 0 pesticide and 0 fungicides in general because they are generally done indoors. So from a kind of environmental point of view, you're generally using almost no pesticides. What you end up if you do have pests, they almost always use natural predators. So even though they're using inorganic fertilizers in this, or I'm using inorganic fertilizers, I should say, in the US, you can definitely be certified organic if they use organic nutrient. But a lot of the practices, in my opinion, are even better than organic because organic, you're still allowed to use fertilizers and you're still allowed to use pesticides. You just have to use certain ones.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, great.
Well, thanks, Harry. So next question is from Dory, who's actually asking that where can you get the growing pots from, the ones which you're using? I know you mentioned about IKEA, right?
Yeah, so that unfortunately IKEA stopped stocking it. I obviously wasn't doing a good enough job telling people to buy them. But I think I had a quick look today, and I think Asda had one for £50. Amazon's got hundreds of different ones. I did the one I showed that was from Asda, looked really nice. I obviously haven't used it, but this one looked really nice to me, but I haven't used it, so I can't really comment on how well it works, but it looks good.
Oh, I think Dory has written in the chat that he meant the ones with the indicators.
The ones with the oh right, these ones. This one. So I think some of the
Yes.
the big hi there. The big stores sell them. In this case, I ordered them online because I normally order several at once. I order 10 at once, so I just order them online from the website. I can tell you the brand name if you want. I think it's Le Cruiser. Don't know how well that will. That looks like it shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So the next question is from Robert, who's asking that, are you germinating seeds at room temperature or do you just use a heating mat?
I actually don't have any heating mats. What I do have is, I can't really show it to you because it's on the other side of the room, but I have kind of a shelf that we've got lots of house plants on, and they've all got LED light strips at the bottom, so they generate a little bit of heat. So I normally put my seeds on top of there, but for the most part, I just germinate them at room temperature.
Okay. Thanks, Harry. So the next question is from, I missed out the name, sorry. So that is, would you give the links to the charts you displayed? Would you like to share it?
The links to the
Charts that you have displayed in the slides.
Oh yeah, sure. I will. I'm not sure what's the easiest way to do that.
I think we could be able to do that. Maybe we could just share your slides with everyone.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so the next question is from Roberta. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No, sorry, I was just going to say after the webinar, we can share the slides or parts of them and also the recording. So we will send the webinar attendees an email with these because we have your email addresses from Eventbrite. So we can do that after the webinar.
Yeah. Yeah, so a couple of questions more to go, Harry.
All right, no worries.
Another one is from Roberta, who's asking, do you find that some plants do better in hydroponics than others? For instance, she mentioned about rosemary, which does a lot better in drier climate.
Yeah, so I'd basically agree with her and say I've struggled with rosemary hydroponically. I do definitely find some crops are kind of easier to do. Basil I find super easy. I just root it in water from store-bought packets of basil and then pop it into hydroponics. Lettuce is also super happy in hydroponics. That's almost all that I do. Tomatoes are great. Chilies are quite good, but they sometimes struggle to flower or struggle to set fruit, I find. But I would definitely agree with her on rosemary. That's one I've tried several, and I really struggled with rosemary. But yeah, I do definitely find some easier and some more difficult.
Okay, I think we have got our last question now, which is from Cilliers, who's asking, when you start growing plants, what would you recommend to grow first as the easiest and of most value?
I think microgreens definitely. So even if you see what people are doing now from a commercial scale, a lot of them are high-end growing kind of microgreens because they sell for a really high price for how much effort they are. I definitely suggest that, especially if you're growing food crops. Microgreens are a great start, although they're probably not something you want to eat every day. So then I'd suggest once you've got that down, I'd definitely start looking at the herbs, rosemary, not rosemary, basil, thyme comes to mind, and then lettuces straight after that are really easy. I think lettuce is my favorite to grow because it's so easy to also just go pull off a leaf when you want one, and then leave the rest of the plant to grow.
Oh, that's really wonderful. And the last question, sorry, Harry, is from Manasi, who's asking, can we grow beans in the hydroponic system?
Yeah, I've grown. I haven't grown beans personally, but I know you can. I've grown peas, sugar snap peas, as well as I can't remember what they're called, but kind of the peas that do end up looking like beans. You get quite a big pod, so there's no reason why you can't. Peas are actually really great to answer Robbie's question as well. Peas work well, so I can't see any reason why beans wouldn't be as good as peas, except if you're in an apartment. Again, you're going to have a space problem when they're trying to trail up your whole wall.
Okay, so thanks a lot for the talk, Harry, and again for answering all those questions.